Hello, good afternoon. My name is Advocate John Philip Rubin. I'm an international lawyer and also solution journalist. We would like to speak today about the topic of unity in making this world a better world, in overcoming crisis, whether political, geopolitical, diplomatic crisis, perhaps also social crisis. If someone looks at the diplomacy during the last year, he or she will probably see a lot of changes, positive changes. There were very severe crises. There was even a crisis between the United States and France. There was a crisis between China and the United States. There was a crisis between Lebanon and Israel. There was a crisis in Ethiopia between the government and the armed forces. And there was a misunderstanding between the USA and Europe. There is a crisis between Europe and Hungary. There's a crisis between the Western world and Russia. And things are changing. And if through a pattern of diplomacy, of dialogue, which is almost the same every time, and which every time is successful. We will see, first we'll describe the pattern, we'll describe the successes, and afterwards we'll say what are the roots of this practice. We could start by taking the case of the cancellation of the contract between Australia and France regarding submarines. France undertook to provide submarines to Australia. The contract was cancelled and Australia signed with the United States. There was a crisis, and to the point where the French president decided not to go to the General Assembly, the opening of the new session in September at the United Nations in New York, because New York is located in the USA, and because this contract was cancelled, as the relationship between France and the USA was not so good. And of course, it's not a simple act of diplomacy, because all the countries, all the president, the heads of states, they did come to the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. So there was a crisis. And a few months afterwards, there was a new summit. It could be G7 or G20. And before the summit, there was a meeting between the U.S. President, Mr. Joe Biden, and the French President, Mr. Emmanuel Macron. And they understood that the things that they have in common, the values, the interests that they have in common, are much larger than the source of conflict. And they decided to discuss, to reach an agreement on the difficult issues, but to acknowledge that there are common interests and common values. And they even published a declaration afterwards showing and stressing all the points they share with each other between the United States and France. And the crisis was over, meaning that by looking at the common denominator and the common points between the two countries, by seeing what is important and what is less important, we can overcome any diplomatic crisis. It was a first success. Part of this success was to open a discussion and to dialogue, not to enter in an escalation of sanctions and boycotts. And this has been done in the past. In the past, you would have American products or products coming from the USA, which were with very high custom duties, or which were forbidden in Europe. But this time, this didn't happen. There was the ambassadors were not called back to the country. There was no. There was a work of introspection, of mindfulness on the part of the French president, which made him understand that we should look at the broader picture and not jeopardize 15 or 50 or 60 years of very good diplomatic relations between the two countries. So, of course, this introspection, this meditation is very important because it makes us see the truth. It makes us go beyond the emotional aspect of the cancellation of the contract, even though it was a very big contract, and politically the French president probably committed himself to certain areas in France and factories, and he was in a difficult political situation because there was a promises which was broken. And but despite this risk, despite that his honor was the honor of the French president was in difficult situation, this introspection, this meditation with mindfulness enabled the French president to look at all the aspects of the issue, and in the end to reach a diplomatic solution. And there is a close link, cooperation between Europe, between France and the USA today on several issues. We'll see afterwards. So we see that meditation, or the fact that you stand before the Creator and you try to find the truth, it enables you or any important head of state or people of governance to overcome crisis and to reach unity, overcome political difficulties. And it's a tool, this meditation is a tool to reach unity and to solve conflicts, to reach peace. There's also another tool, and the other tool is also spiritual, is always to prefer dialogue, to speak with the other person, to clarify the areas where there is a difference of opinion. And very often, by speaking to the other person, instead of using force, whether it's economic force or whether it's force from army or diplomatic force, by having a dialogue, by exchanging views about interests, about values, and by trying to seek the truth, and we can each other can bring to the counterpart, to the other person participating in the dialogue, a view of truth, and therefore he can help the other person to get rid of certain misconception. I'm going to perhaps to explain a little bit more clearly. Let's say that we think that money solves everything, and because of money, because France lost 80 billion of euros, it was a very huge contract, and we think that the money is the main value. So we cannot lose money, because losing money is losing power, it's losing politics. Money is everything. That's a misconception. It could be the conception, and it was probably the first understanding of the conflict, the economy, the economic side. And afterwards, by discussing together, they found out that there are values which are beyond money, beyond. So even though there was a loss of money, but there are things which were not lost in this crisis, like common values of democracy, values of human dignity, of human rights, values of belonging to a civilization of dialogue, of diplomacy, of solving conflicts by talks and not only by military force. So, by overcoming the misconceptions that money is everything, they reach a solution seeing other and broader aspects of their relations, the relation between the USA and France. So we see that by this dialogue, we get rid of misconceptions, which in fact are like lies. It's and we reach a truth, and when there is truth, there is peace. Because truth, meaning that I'm connected, I don't have any personal interest. The conflict comes from the fact that I have a personal interest. I want probably all the exposure, all the honor. I want to be the first one, and therefore someone is challenging me, and I cannot accept it. That's a conflict. But if we see the truth, meaning that everyone has his place, we have common values, and also we have each of the country has a specific role. Like for instance, the USA, they have a specific role probably in Asia, and France has a specific role in Africa. And by acknowledging the fact that we're the truth, that we are a little bit different, that we have areas which are more American oriented or more French oriented, perhaps because of the languages, or perhaps because of the culture, or the values, or any interests. Then we overcome, we solve the conflict, we recognize that we have common values, and that one country can be like more leader in a certain region, and it doesn't make me feel uncomfortable in my position, because because the other country is also a leader in another region, another space, other geopolitical space. And this work is only possible through meditation, which makes you understand, find the truth, and have a great connection with the Creator, and perhaps give up on selfish interests. And the second tool, besides meditation, is dialogue. When we speak, when we exchange views, when we try to understand, when we express our point of view, but we try to understand the conceptions of the other side, then we can get rid of false conceptions, false ways to understand the world. And this pattern has been reproduced several times. For instance, there was in Europe, in Prague, a meeting between all the leaders, all the heads of states from Europe, even though they don't belong to the same international organization. For instance, there were heads of states from the European Union, but there was also people from heads of states from the United Kingdom, or from Eastern Europe countries, which are not part. They are not part of the European Union. But it was important that there should be a dialogue. And the format, which was probably drafted by the idea, and the format which was probably drafted by French President Macron, and the Belgian or the President of the European Council, Mr. Charles Michel, was that there was like a common meeting of all the heads of state for 1 hour, and afterwards 3 or 4 hours of discussion between, like dialogue between one head of state with another head of state. And it was also an opportunity to clarify the position of Hungary, sorry for the mistake, to find out what is in common, what are the values and the interests which are in common, and what are the values which are not in common, and perhaps find that there's a consensus on 80% or 90% of the values, and so there's no big crisis. It's not a big crisis as people can pretend. And this meeting, this summit in Prague was very, very interesting. And there was also, they didn't want, the leaders, the European leaders didn't want to publish afterwards a joint declaration, because they wanted to use this platform of dialogue as something informal, something of like which may change a change of paradigm, a change of our understanding of international relations. So it was also very positive, very innovative. We had both the idea and the structure, the idea that we should solve problems, even conflicts, by dialogue and diplomacy, and also the structure, meaning that we should speak, each head of state should speak with the other head of state, even though they have like different views on some topics, they should speak together. Afterwards, there was a discussion on more or less with the same idea between Europe and the United States. Afterwards, an agreement was reached between Lebanon and Israel. It's something very special. We know today the kind of conflict which is taking place between the two countries, and probably there was a lot of work which was done to find the common point, even though the countries are not exactly good friends. And Ethiopia, it was also very positive. There was on the part of the African countries, the African countries handled the negotiations between in Ethiopia, and within 5 days an agreement was reached. It was very responsible, very innovative. Of course, there was the cooperation of the United Nations, of the United States, it could be of France too, but it's very positive. There are also talks between the United States asked Ukraine to start negotiation with Russia, and perhaps the last interesting summit or talk was like the G20 in Indonesia a few days ago, where before the G20 meeting, there was a dialogue between the U.S. President Joe Biden with the President of China, Mr. Xi Jinping. And we see that even though there was a lot of tensions during the last years, during the 5 last years, and we don't want too much to evolve about, to speak about this topic, but it's very interesting that we saw the two leaders. One leader, Mr. Joe Biden, the president, was very open-minded, and he wanted to very friendly, and he was not going with ideology, but trying to speak and solve problems. Understand that there's a competition on the economic side, but that we need to cooperate on the global issues. And so it was very open-minded, and probably there was also willingness to renew the relationship, to come with more creative way to solve diplomatic conflicts. And on the side of the president of China, he also saw that the U.S. president was candid, that he was open-minded and truth, and he didn't try to deceive someone, and he very much appreciated this way of thinking. So we see also, but this meeting between the two leaders, it helped probably attain the truth and resolve the very high tensions which was going on between the two countries. So we see the same pattern in diplomacy during the last year of trying to solve very complex international conflicts. It could be in Ethiopia, in Israel, or the tension between the U.S. and China, or the economic the conflict between France and the USA, by meditating, by introspection, by mindfulness, by trying to stand before the Creator and try to find the truth. What is the truth for the USA? What is the truth for Ethiopia, for Ukraine, for Russia, for France, for China? So it's very positive, and also try to solve problems by dialogue and an exchange of views. And what is very interesting is that more than 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, there was a sage which is called Sage Shalom Arush. He's the author, he's a global spiritual leader, and he wrote a very famous book which is called The Universal Garden of Emunah. Emunah is faith in the Creator, and the book, the international bestseller, which was translated in few languages, was sent to world leaders in Europe and in other countries, and there were also meetings. It was sent to embassies. It was sent to whether the ebook or link to ebook was sent to even permanent representations of 200 countries at the United Nations in New York. It was sent to the international media. There's a lot of outreach which has been done during the last year and last 2 or 3 years. And he mentioned teaching from Nachman of Breslev. Nachman of Breslev was a sage of the Jewish people 200 years ago. And in his teaching, I think teaching 27, he says that when there's peace, people can discuss and open and run a dialogue between them, and they can get rid of their false conceptions. And when they do so, they come closer to the Creator, and probably they come closer to truth. And we see that this teaching is implemented at the highest level, and it helps of states, of geopolitical spaces, regions, and it helps solving very strong, very acute conflicts. And if we had asked ourselves 3 or 4 years ago, do you think it possible that there should be a meeting and with a good atmosphere between the U.S. president and the president of China? The answer would have been negative. Do you think that we can solve a conflict in Ethiopia through negotiation handled by African countries? Probably it would have the answer would have been negative. Do you think do you think that we can solve also open a negotiation between Ukraine and Russia? People probably would have answered by the negative. So we see that these spiritual tools, which have been drafted by Nachman Breslev 200 years ago, and they have been brought to our generation by sage Shalom Arush in his book, The Universal Garden of Emunah, of Faith in the Creator. They are very helpful at the high level, at a very high level to solve conflicts and to bring unity and peace in the world and solve political and social crises. Thank you. A lot of blessings. Goodbye from Jerusalem.